But I am concerned, and I'm going to say it again, that many Catholics today are becoming sedevacantist in many ways except the name. So they'll still kind of give lip service to the Pope and the bishops, but then completely distrust the Pope and the bishops. And I'll just give you a few examples of things that I've heard and encountered that seem to suggest this. You know, you've got people probably in my YouTube comments saying, can we finally talk about the heresies in theology of the body? Or can we finally admit that Faustina and that whole thing, that she was a fraud? Or women shouldn't be wearing pants? Or I heard of one group, I think it was in Arizona, they finally talked their priest into celebrating the Tridentine Mass, but then they discovered that he was using some hosts consecrated in the Novus Ordo and said, actually, we'd like, don't do that. So what are you saying? What do you mean don't do that? Like this, you're saying the Novus Ordo is invalid? And this stuff is just getting, forgive me, but wackier and wackier. And it kind of feels like the more obscure thing you can point and cling to, the more maybe orthodox you are, or the more conservative and trustworthy you are. Like I wonder if some of these people, like I know like Taylor Marshall, for example, has a great video he did back in the day on how Muslims and Christians worship the same God. You know,
I found that video very beneficial.
Yeah.
Because at the time
I don't know if
asking,
you'd say that today.
I don't think he would after his critique of Nostra Aetate. He critiqued it and
maybe he's changed his mind, right? And people are free to do that.
Yeah, I think he has, and he accuses Vatican II in that instance of heresy, and that's where I think, okay, this creates problems, because now we're saying that the magisterium can promulgate heresy as long as it doesn't do it definitively. I think that is one issue that really, really, really needs to be addressed today, because so many people are under the impression that the only thing that is really being protected by the Holy Spirit is the infallibility of definitive teachings, like an ex cathedra teaching or a solemn definition of an ecumenical council.
Well, that's our hope, isn't it? Because if that's not true, we're just left with this Pope who says all sorts of stuff. I think that's why Catholics are like, oh God, no, he's never done anything ex cathedra, so none of it matters.
But this is why it's important to be aware of some very important distinctions when it comes to the magisterium. I won't concede that the Pope has promulgated anything, even in his merely authentic or non-definitive teachings. I don't think that he's promulgated anything that's heretical or even erroneous. I haven't seen anything yet. So if there is something out there, I haven't seen it. That being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that he makes the best decisions prudentially, and that doesn't mean that he might not say something that's doctrinally deficient whenever he's not acting in his magisterium. That's certainly possible. But when we are aware of some of these distinctions, then we're able to start to say, okay, well, I think we need to be a little bit more limited in the scope of what we're saying here whenever we're critiquing Pope Francis for what he's saying. Because again, I don't think that it's a doctrinally defensible position to maintain that an ecumenical council can promulgate heresy as long as it's not definitive, or that the Pope can promulgate heresy in his magisterium as long as it's not ex cathedra. Even though that tends to be a very popular view these days, I don't think that that's a tenable position. I think that is actually not only is it not a traditional Catholic view, it's actually going against some other things that the magisterium has said, which is where the irony is, because usually the people that are saying this kind of stuff are presenting themselves as guardians of tradition and being the most orthodox Catholics when they're actually in dissent from the magisterium, and that's my problem.
Yes.
A lot of people don't realize, for instance, that non-definitive teachings of the Pope or an ecumenical council requires a certain level of assent on our part. So Vatican II, its teachings, even whenever it doesn't teach definitively, it still requires religious submission of intellect and will at the very least. A lot of people don't recognize that. They think unless it's taught infallibly, I can completely dismiss it. That's a major danger today. That's not a traditional Catholic view either in the pre-conciliar era or today. It's just completely in dissent from the magisterium itself. And that creates problems because the magisterium itself has said in these non-definitive teachings that those are instances of Jesus's words, "He who hears you hears me." This is coming, for example, from Pius XII in the pre-conciliar era, who says his non-definitive teachings in his encyclical, if you're rejecting them, you're really rejecting Christ, because he who hears you hears me. He applies that to his non-definitive teachings. How much more does that then apply to an ecumenical council? If I'm rejecting an ecumenical council thinking, oh, I can reject it because it's not definitive, what you're actually doing is you're rejecting Christ, because the magisterium itself has already said that these are instances of Jesus speaking through the magisterium. That's a huge problem.
Thoughts on benevacantism?
Yeah. So
is Patrick Coffin one of the primary promoters of this? I guess there's not too many folks.
Edmund Maza. And I think they have very slightly different views. I know Patrick Coffin recently critiqued his version of benevacantism.
Oh, okay. Has he backtracked at all, or is he?
Which one?
Patrick.
No, I wouldn't necessarily say he's backtracked.
What word do you give to somebody who rejects the current pontiff and claims to be Catholic?
Schismatic. I mean, according to the definition of Canon Law 751, a refusal to submit to the Roman pontiff is the very definition of schism.
Yes.
So I would say if you're really adhering to a benevacantist thesis, that's schismatic.
And for those at home who are unfamiliar with that term.
So for benevacantism, it's a unique phenomenon. It's a recent one, and I don't think it's going to be around that much longer. But it's this idea that Pope Benedict is still the Pope. Either that he's entirely still the Pope and Pope Francis is not, he's an anti-Pope, or there's other versions that might say Pope Benedict is sharing part of the papacy with Pope Francis. There's various versions to it. Either way, however, I would just categorize that as falling within schism. And that's troubling, because I hear a lot of people say, look, these are valid options in Catholicism. Benevacantism, sedevacantism, these are just various differences in Catholicism. And I'm just thinking, how does that work with our definition of schism?
Yes.
It doesn't really work with that. I don't see that.
What? Yeah, keep going.
No, I was just saying that's one of my difficulties with it, aside from the fact that I don't think it's that there's any real reason to maintain that Benedict is still the Pope. I think he made it very, very clear in his resignation speech that he's going to resign in such a way that the See of St. Peter is going to be vacant and the College of Cardinals will need to elect a new Pope. All you have to have for a valid resignation is that it has to be free. You know, you can't be pressured. It has to be free, and it has to be manifestly stated. And he did both. Yeah. He was free, and it was manifestly stated. Because he's saying, I'm resigning in such a way that you're going to have to elect a new pope. He made it very, very clear.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's a tenable position. Now, some people will say, oh, but maybe he was forced out. Maybe he was pressured out. But when there's no evidence for that, what I'm hearing is we're covering up one conspiracy theory with another conspiracy theory because there's no evidence for this, and we're covering it up with something else that has no evidence. So it's like...
Thanks so much for watching. Please like if you liked, and if you loved, subscribe.